Okay, so let's talk about actual movement in the hip. Now, what I want you to understand is that there are different ways that we can load this joint, okay? So if I were to, let me set this down here. If I were to stand in a tree pose, let's say, all right, what is happening through my hips here? All right, so I have one leg that's going to be loaded, okay, and another leg, or the other leg, that is going to be externally rotating, but it's also in a flexed position. Yeah, all right, so I have to flex that hip and then externally rotate in order to come into this position. So what that's going to look like in my model here is that I'm going to have this standing leg, all right? This leg here is going to flex, and then it's going to externally rotate, okay? So can you kind of see how that, okay? Now, that's great. What happens when we are externally rotating in a non-weighted position as opposed to rotating when it's weighted? Okay, so think about this. How does this show up in our practices? So we just did a non-weighted rotation through the hip socket, all right? What if we go into a warrior three and then up into a moon pose, half moon, all right? So you're rotating as your leg, or as this joint here is loaded, okay? And so when we do that, now there's kind of a lot going on in here, but when we do that, so we're going to do this sort of movement, all right? Okay? And then we're going to, so the pelvis is kind of like this, and then we're going to open it up like this, okay? So for me, it's going to look like this, and then we open it up, okay? Now, there's been a lot of discussion about weighted rotations in the hip sockets within teacher circles. One of the things that we need to understand is that when we create rotation in a joint, first of all, we are not grinding the joint. We are not creating arthritis into this joint. We are using a very secure scenario where there are boundaries in the movement, okay? And we have awareness happening in the joint that allows us to bring this sort of rotation into that joint. Whereas, especially here in Canada, during the winter, you know, you go across a parking lot and your hips are going in all directions. You're trying to save yourself from falling down onto the concrete. When we're in our yoga classes, we're able to welcome that sort of movement in a really conscious, full of awareness moment, which helps the tissues to adapt so that when we are on that skating rink of a parking lot, that we are able to support the joint without having overuse happen. Does that make sense? All right. So we want to allow for both the unweighted, all right, no load, as well as loaded movement into this joint right here, all right? Remembering that as we cue it, the word hip can mean different things for different people. So how can we help them? Sometimes it just means getting them, instead of placing their hands up here by their waist, get them to bring their hands down to where that leg moves. And you can get them to kind of explore that, feel that movement, all right? And then have their hands there. Once they've got their hands there, then they can feel those changes within the joint itself. I hope that helps.